Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guest Jackson-Mackenzie, and he's here today to share with us his new book, Whole Again, Healing Your Heart and Rediscovering Your True Self After Toxic Relationships and Emotional Abuse. Now, Jackson is the co-founder of Psychopathy.com, which is an online support community that reaches millions of abuse survivors each month. Driven by personal experience, his mission is to spread awareness and give survivors a safe place to validate their experiences so that every empathic person can find happiness and love after abuse. So let's welcome to the show, Jackson-Mackenzie.
Thank you so much for having me, Marianne.
It's just an honor and a pleasure to have you here to talk about this. I mean, gosh, the subtitle of your book, Healing Your Heart and Rediscovering Your True Self After Toxic Relationships and Emotional Abuse. I mean, I don't think there's a person walking the planet that hasn't been through a major heartbreak.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these kinds of situations really impact all of us or someone we know, and you can really see the long-lasting impacts that can really leave a mark on someone after it's over.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if it could be just a breakup with a boyfriend, girlfriend, friends, whatever, you name it. It hits everyone just the same.
Yeah, exactly. It's not comforting, but to see that it's a universal experience and know that there are others out there, I think really means a lot and helps people to branch out after they've been through it to find a sense of community and to find some validation that they're not alone.
I think that's so important, because definitely when people are going through this, they're most definitely not alone. You have a community, there's your books, there's a huge community out there for people who are looking to heal from this. And before we get too far down the road, I'd love for you to share with us, what inspired you to write this book? Because I know this is your second book, right?
Yeah, the first book is called Psychopathy, and it's about the cluster B personality disorders and how their patterns tend to play out in relationships. So cluster B meaning sociopath, narcissist, borderline, and histrionic. And it really focuses pretty heavily on the signs and symptoms of the perpetrator and red flags, ways to avoid it and get past that relationship. And what I found from both myself and from a lot of readers of the first book was that a lot of people had some really long-lasting, lingering trauma and effects from that relationship, even long after the person was gone, and that could be romantic or a family relationship, where they're still carrying old wounds that are holding them back from their greatest potential. And that's where the idea from Whole Again came from, was to start working on a project and a book that was really all about the reader and looking internally and starting to work through those wounds.
No, that's, so important because, getting to a place where, I've gone through heartbreak. I know everyone has. When we get to that place where we feel like it's a mortal wound, it's just, you don't ever feel like you're going to be whole again.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that belief of brokenness and that fear that something is really just wrong with us forever that can kind of be like a infinite loop, that feedback loop that keeps telling you that, and so you believe it, and it makes you feel so bad, and we a lot of times end up continuing to attract more of the same exact situations that cause so much harm because that self-worth is so damaged, and we don't yet see what we deserve and our true nature.
Yeah. Well, and you hear that often when people are in relationships with individuals that classify as cluster B. They do that whole thing where it's like, well, you're not good enough, after they've kind of built you up for a while, and all of a sudden then you're not good enough, no one will love you, there's something wrong with you, you're crazy. And then, it's whether or not, and I think a lot of people just subconsciously kind of buy into it a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a good point because even long after that person's gone, you still may find that you still have that voice of self-doubt. Like if someone called you crazy when you tried to express your intuition, a lot of times in those cluster B relationships, they're infidelity and betrayal and being lied to, and meanwhile the person is telling you that you're wrong and that your version of reality is incorrect. And that kind of self-doubt can really sit under the surface for a long time, make you really wonder about your own perspective and your own views. And likewise, if that person replaces you overnight with another partner that they had been cheating with, and then rubs that person in your face, which tends to be the outcome of those relationships, a lot of times people absorb these messages of inadequacy, or that I'm not enough, or that other people are better than me. And those wounds are so painful. A lot of times it's not really even something that you see consciously. It's more something that's happening subconsciously. On the surface level, you might actually see that person saying, oh, no, that person stinks. I'm so glad I got out of this. I'm better than them. But under all of that, still there's that vulnerability and that wounding that can come from having a pretty intense betrayal from someone that you trusted and cared about, and the messages we absorb about ourselves from that external event.
So in your book, you talk about core wounds. Is that what you mean when what you're explaining?
Yeah, exactly. I think core wounding can really be different for everyone, but for the most part, I think it comes when we experience rejection or a betrayal or an abandonment from a trusted loved one, and from that we absorb messages of defectiveness about ourselves, and from there everything kind of becomes about avoiding that same wounding from happening again. So protecting and controlling and avoidance, and it can be a really difficult way to live. And like I said earlier, we kind of keep finding ourselves repeating those same dynamics that we were trying so hard to protect ourselves from.
Okay, well, you brought up patterns, so I think this is a good time to talk about that. So when we're noticing patterns in a relationship, what is that telling us? What are some of the red flags we should be looking for?
So I think there's two kind of ways to look at red flags. The first being about the other person. So, if you notice that this person moves at the speed of light, and they're suddenly instantly infatuated by everything about you. They're just fascinated. They want to text 24/7 and learn everything about you. They have the same goals, hopes, dreams, insecurities. You're so much better than all their crazy exes. Those would be kind of those early warning red flags where I kind of say, it's a good idea to take a step back and realize that most people don't become that obsessed that quickly with someone else. And especially once you're in the relationship, just making sure that you're being respected and that the person is not criticizing or gaslighting or manipulating you. Those would all be kind of more insidious and subtle forms of emotional abuse that can be really hard to pinpoint. So it's important to be able to listen to our instincts and all of that. But on the other side, I would say the red flags that we can look for in ourselves, at least some that I've found, is that when I'm doing things motivated out of guilt or fear or self-doubt, it's usually a sign that I'm not in a situation that's ideal for me, because I find that when I'm with trusted friends, loved ones, a great partner, coworkers, that I'm not doing those things. And so I think becoming aware of our own behaviors, and especially any repeated patterns that seem to keep happening in relationships, can really help.
Yeah. Well, it's so important to look for that because, you really kind of have it broken down. There's a cycle that happens, when a sociopath or someone that falls within that cluster B category that is looking to get into a new relationship, there are certain things that they do.
Yeah, exactly. And those patterns almost become like textbook clockwork. One of the first things people do after those relationships is kind of start to read articles and resources and books, and they all say the same thing. It's like they just say, it just sounds like you're describing my exact relationship.
Well, and that's got to be like heartbreaking, but at the same time with your book, Whole Again, it's helping a lot of people, not only kind of see where they are in their relationship and if that's something they want to progress with or continue down that path, but also to develop, the ability to heal themselves, to heal their hearts and really kind of gain that self-confidence back.
Oh, thank you. It really does inspire me. It's one of those weird things where I always say I would love it if no one ever needed to read another one of my books, which is a weird perspective to have from an author, but it's really true that it is heartbreaking that people need these resources and continue to need them. But my hope, as optimistic as it may be, is that someday we're all aware and able to protect ourselves and have that self-love that would never let us get into harm's way again.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a little bit of terminology that I want you to explain to our listeners, because then it kind of brings everything together and makes a little bit more, more sense for people that might be new to this topic. You mentioned earlier gaslighting, and while most people might know what that is, I'd love for you to share what that is.
Oh, yeah. Gaslighting is especially common in those types of disorders that we've been discussing. It's basically when you are being told that your version of reality, something that's actually happening, is either not happening or happening differently, or a lot of times they'll actually turn around and tell you that you're doing it. And so that can be something as simple as like saying, I'm going to go take a shower, and then for some reason just going and doing something completely different. They often lie for no reason, and if you were to say, like, hey, what happened if I was taking a shower, and then a regular person might just say, like, oh, yeah, no, I didn't do that, and they'll say, yeah, I did, and that's obviously like a silly example, but where it becomes a lot more pertinent is they often are kind of hanging out with their exes that they called crazy, or they're courting new partners and kind of waving them in your face a little bit, and if you point that out or say, oh, I thought you said this person was abusive or hurt you, they'll say things like, oh, I never said that. And then they'll say, no, now you're being abusive, you're crazy. And after a while, those kinds of mind games just start to make you feel like you're losing it a little bit. It's extremely confusing, and it actually puts you on the defense, so you're constantly trying to prove yourself, and in doing so, tend to come across more unstable anyways, and thereby kind of proving their whole point.
Yeah, it's kind of a way that they put people off, so you're so busy trying to defend your position or try to figure out what's true and what's not, that nothing really makes sense.
Exactly.
Well, and when someone's on this path to healing their heart, let's say they've left that person, that's in the cluster B category, how long does it take for them to heal themselves? Is this something that can be done quickly? Does it take a long time? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it really depends on the individual, sort of like how we're all predisposed to different health issues, blood pressure, cholesterol. I think our mental health and the ways that we deal with heartbreak and trauma are all different. I think there's certainly people who go through these experiences and just pretty quickly say, like, no, that was weird and crazy, and I'm never going to get into that again. But a lot of the people that I've spoken with, you see that even when you understand that the relationship wasn't okay and that you don't want to be with that person anymore, the lingering effects of trauma can last a lot longer, especially if you've absorbed self-doubt or anxiety or all of these things of, oh, something must be wrong with me. Those messages are not something that will disappear on their own unless they're kind of tended to and eventually released.
Mm-hmm. It really just takes time. I think a lot of it, too, it's interesting reading your book. I mean, as I examine my own life and look to see where those pieces that need to be healed are, I mean, you can feel them. It's like something that can be felt, and I'm sure most people, as they're doing that as well, can feel where those injuries and those hurts are.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on. It's a physical sensation that is, and we do things sometimes to distract from those sensations because it's painful. It's like a physical hurt, and so when we slow down and kind of stop our distractions, whether those be being a workaholic or jumping from relationship to relationship or addiction, and perfectionism, any number of those distractions. I think when we slow down, that pain in our body kind of starts to unnumb and thaw out, and you start feeling all of that same old discomfort that maybe a long time ago was really too much to handle. And I think though we find that we start to have the courage to face it and realize that it's not necessarily true and not who we are.
Yeah. Well, I'd love for us to talk about people who are codependent. And I hear this all the time, and it's probably something it's kind of repeated where people say, well, I'm a people pleaser. I like helping people. I like, making sure that everyone's happy. And what are some of the things that people who identify as people pleasers, what are some of the things that they really need to watch out for?
That's a great question. I think, first of all, the desire to help other people and to care and empathize with other human beings is a really beautiful thing, and I would never call that a bad thing in someone. I think where it kind of starts to cross the line and become dangerous to ourselves is when we're sacrificing our own needs in order to make room for the needs of others, and possibly entering friendships or relationships with people based on who we think they could be, as opposed to who they actually are, because it becomes very easy to think, if they just did this, or if I could help them with this, then we'd be really happy. And it's kind of like the never-ending treadmill, because once you reach that point, there's always a new target or goal to reach. So I really encourage people who resonate with those kinds of patterns to look inward, and a lot of times they'll find some damaged self-worth or the feeling that they're never enough. And so by taking care of others, you may feel appreciated, you may feel like you are enough or get that burst of self-worth, but often tend to end up in situations of like rescuing or caretaking that can be really draining and sort of one-sided. And those dynamics are usually really unfulfilling, because in an ideal dynamic, you have two individuals who are working on themselves to get healthier, to be happier, and not relying on someone else for that sense of happiness.
Yeah, it really is. And when they talk about it being an inside job, it really is, And it's interesting. You look at mindfulness, how does that play a role in all of this?
I think mindfulness is one of the best ways to start just non-judgmentally getting in touch with all of these things that may have gotten there in childhood or may have gotten there through a bad relationship or two, and just slowing down. I think we live in a world where everything is so fast-paced and so fast-moving that it's easy to kind of keep the mind going 100 miles an hour all the time. And with mindfulness, we really slow down and just notice that. We're not saying stop. We're not saying, why am I thinking that or why am I doing this? All we're doing is just like noticing. Like if you were just sitting in a room and watching that person's thoughts, that's all you're doing. And I think the more we do that, the more the body and mind start to reveal their ticket to us of everything that has been experienced, and especially the painful or suffering aspects of it. And with mindfulness, we're able to get in touch with that discomfort. We can become comfortable with discomfort without being consumed by it. We can hear these messages of like, you're inadequate or you're worthless or you're rejectable and other people are better than you without being consumed by them. We can just say, oh, that's interesting. There's that message again. There's that feeling again. That hurts. That hurts when I experience that. And the more we do it, the more we start to identify with the observer rather than that kind of nasty voice on the inside.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, it's interesting because, a lot of times if we follow that thread back to like, where did I first hear this? Where was I first told you're not good enough, you're not worthy, you're not pretty enough, you're not handsome enough, you're not whatever,
Yeah.
When you follow that back, a lot of times when you can see the face of the person that said it, you're like, well, they're so wrong,
Exactly. And it's not even necessarily trying to heal those messages, because I am a strong believer that you can't even really heal something that was false to begin with. I think in the book I used this metaphor that, like, if someone calls me a cat, I don't heal from that accusation because I'm not a cat, and you just dismiss it. And I think, like, the examples you just brought up of, like, you're not enough, or you're not pretty, or you're crazy, those kinds of things, those are those messages that we can start to experiment with, just saying, oh, that's just not true. It's not necessarily something you need to comfort or soothe. It's just a whole lot of nonsense, like being called a cat.
Yeah, if someone called me a cat, I'd be like, oh, so what? You know?
Exactly.
That doesn't have any influence on me whatsoever, you know. But, you know, it's interesting because words do have impact, and they have meaning. And, you know, if it's something that someone takes internally, I mean, it could change their whole trajectory of their life in many ways, even if they're not really aware of it.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of brings you along for the ride. You don't even really notice it, but it drives, like you said, so much of what you do.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I was really happy when, I mean, your book, Whole Again, it does talk about boundaries. And I think that's so important. And I kind of learned about some of that a little bit late in life. So I think it's great that this is a resource where people can learn about it earlier. You know? So when we talk about boundaries, you know, how important are they? And how do we know when our boundaries get crossed?
Yeah, boundaries are so important. I think they come hand in hand as we start developing self-respect. We realize, like, hey, I kind of like this person that I've been nurturing and mindfulnessing with. Just made up a word there. But doing all of those things, you start to care for that person, and you don't want to put them in harm's way anymore, meaning yourself, because you've been working really hard and you're starting to like who you are. And boundaries are kind of the next natural step that say, here's the invisible line between me and other people. I think you'll find, this is what I've found, is that the majority of the people in my life never even come remotely close to crossing the boundary. It's the people who tend to be a little bit more problematic, who start out a little closer to the line and then just kind of keep pushing until before you know it, they're kind of way further and more invasive than you ever would have intended. And that kind of slow drip is hard to see coming, and it's really confusing once it's already there, because you may not have expected it, and then you don't really know what to do from there. I think a lot of times, especially people with codependency issues, feel an intense amount of dread and anxiety and guilt when conflict is arising. And I don't mean like yelling or necessarily anything like that, but a lot of codependents can even like sense when other people are starting to get mad at each other, even if it has nothing to do with you, because there's kind of that predisposition to being a little bit overly aware and responsible and concerned for everyone else's emotions. And what that leads to, though, is other people being able to kind of push through and be more aggressive because they know, well, this is too awkward for you to do anything about it, or you're not going to want to react to this. And so strong boundaries are not necessarily about reacting with the same negativity or the same pushiness. Just I really see it as using that same calming observational tone from mindfulness, where you're just like, oh, actually, this doesn't work for me. And I think with the people who are respectful and care about you, they would listen to what you're saying and say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And that would be the end of that. And with people who are more difficult, you are likely to be met with disagreement or arguing or even insulting and criticizing or mocking the boundary. And those are the kinds of people, I think, when you express a boundary and it's met like that, you've got your answer. You don't need to try to convince them of anything. You can just say like, oh, well, I tried, and good luck. All the best to you.
Yeah, you know, it's okay to move on. You don't have to be in a relationship that doesn't respect you, respect your boundaries, and is, toxic in nature. And, we were kind of talking about this a little bit earlier before we started this discussion. A lot of times when people are in that situation, they can't really see the forest from the trees. It's so difficult for them to see that, hey, I'm really in a in a relationship that has a lot of red flags.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so when we look at all of this, what are some ways that we can protect ourselves from hurtful people without being closed?
Oh, yeah, it's really hard to find that balance, especially for someone who's been through trauma, where we protect ourselves without closing our hearts off from the world. And I think, first of all, self-forgiveness and trusting ourselves is such a huge aspect of recovery. It's getting to the point where we stop needing to analyze and judge or nitpick every little thing and rethink and ruminate about the story, and instead saying, okay, I know that this happened. I understand that it happened. I'm not pretending that it didn't happen or it wasn't that bad. But I've also learned a lot of lessons, and I want to learn to trust myself, and I'm going to forgive myself for that situation ever happening and going further than I thought it ever should. But I still want to have an open heart, and I still want to be there. And I think it just goes hand in hand with the mindfulness and the boundaries that we've built up, where we start to say, well, I've got these tools with me. I know how to take care of myself. I know how to react when it's clear that someone's starting to step through my boundaries. Where we run into trouble is if someone starts pushing our boundaries and we let them back in again, then we really start to doubt ourselves more because we're like, oh, no, I did it again. I can't be trusted. I can't be trusted with my own heart. And that's a really sad place to be. And so just practicing those things and not seeing challenges or adversity as, unfair betrayals or how could this happen again, but more shifting the perspective towards seeing them as lessons and opportunities for, I've been presented with another one of these situations, and this time the outcome was different. And I think that gives you a lot of empowerment moving forward.
Well, and it's interesting when you see someone that's gone through maybe several really bad relationships. A lot of times they get additional labels that is not really helpful, maybe saying things like, well, you don't know how to pick a good person, or relationships are bad for you, dating's bad for you. So it's interesting some of the language that well-meaning people around will add to the conversation.
Yeah, and those kinds of judgments can they just add to all of the self-worth issues that are already there. And because if you're struggling with self-worth and self-doubt, and then you have people piling on top of that, all those things do is lower it further and open the floodgates to even more situations like that happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it just kind of skyrockets. It kind of just becomes a snowball from there,
Exactly.
Well, you touched on something. I'd love to kind of just dive into this a little bit more. You talked about boundaries and just how that looks. It's interesting when you see like crisis or blow-ups that are happening on a regular basis in a relationship. What is that really telling somebody about their relationship?
Yeah, everyone's going to have their individual preferences in a relationship, but I think that for the most part, you should find that it's two independent people operating and wanting to share their own love and happiness with the other, where you start to see those crisis situations and the big fights that happen constantly. Of course, any relationship is going to have conflicts, but a lot of times you'll find when two partners are working together that conflicts can be discussed calmly, feelings and emotions can be explored without judgment. And that those things actually help to strengthen your trust in the other person, where you tend to see issues occur, especially in codependent relationships, is you may have one partner who's trying really hard to understand and trying really hard to communicate, and the other person, maybe they have a personality disorder or an addiction, but the bottom line is that they're not doing any of those things. They're actually kind of doing the opposite, and despite any effort you may put in to diffuse a situation, they're actually trying to escalate it. And you can feel like you're going crazy because you think, well, wouldn't anyone want their relationship to be happier? But that's really where we're putting our own desires and perspective onto the other person and failing to see who they're actually presenting us with right now, because that's who we're going to get in the relationship. And we either accept that that's who they are and stay in the relationship knowing that this is going to keep happening, or we start to realize, like, oh, I can't change or save or fix this person, and maybe this dynamic for me just isn't right now.
I love that, because it really is coming from a very empowering place, as opposed to trying to figure out, am I crazy? Am I overreacting? You know, you can kind of go down the rabbit hole with these labels that a lot of times someone who is, a cluster B, who fits within that category, they love using those labels, because later on they'll come back and say, hey, you're nuts. You're making all this up. None of that happened.
Yeah, exactly. And if, unless you're prepared, the default reaction, again, is going to be to try to respond and say, no, that's not true. That's not what happened. And by that point, it's too late. They already have their claws sunk in, and they've gotten the attention that they're seeking. And I think, the whole point you mentioned about the constant crisis situations in a relationship, a lot of the readers that I chat with are getting out of relationships with people experiencing borderline personality disorder, which is in that cluster B spectrum. It's a little different than narcissism, because with narcissists and sociopaths, a lot of times there's this very calm and cool, collected demeanor, and that is not at all the case with borderline. Sometimes at first extremely charming and fun and exciting, but the relationships tend to pretty quickly devolve into daily crisis situations where something is always horribly wrong, life or death. Someone's always yelling or screaming at them, and nothing is ever okay, and you're the one who is going to save and fix them. And people with people-pleasing tendencies fall into the trap of being like, oh, I'm going to be the person who makes you feel better, because they kind of give you that carrot on a stick that says, if you just help me through this, then I'm finally going to feel so good, and we're going to run off into the sunset. And those are the kinds of things, though, that even in a regular relationship just don't come up. Those kinds of conversations don't happen. People aren't seeking the knight in shining armor to save them from the tragedy of their life. And it becomes so easy to get caught up, though, when we don't see that that's abnormal.
Yeah, it can be so. It can really be such a situation that takes some thought to really see what you're in, to kind of step out of. Well, my goodness, Jackson, I mean, we can talk for days on this topic. You're such an inspiration when it comes to this, and I think we really need this right now. It seems like our society is kind of a little overwhelmed with these toxic relationships, and people are feeling, like they've just been through the emotional ringer,
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of reached a point for a lot of people where they can't keep dealing with that, and so people are seeking solutions and answers to really bring them inner peace and the happiness that they deserve, which I just think is amazing.
Mm-hmm. Well, why don't you share with us where our listeners can connect with you and learn more about your book, Whole Again?
Sure. My website and social media handles are all exactly the same. It's Psychopath Free, kind of like a pest, like insect free. But they're all like Facebook, Twitter. I think we have Instagram. I'm not sure. And then the website is psychopathfree.com. And there's a ton of freely available articles there for anyone who has financial difficulties. So we try to really make all of our resources there. I think the Facebook page has like 500,000 followers on it now. So if you're looking for a community to chat with others who have been through the same thing, I think that can be a really helpful resource.
Oh, I've kind of browsed it, and it looks like it's a great resource for people to reach out and be a part of. Jackson, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Marianne. I really appreciate it.
Well, Jackson, it's been such a pleasure to spend this time with you, and of course to talk about your new book, Whole Again, Healing Your Heart and Rediscovering Your True Self After Toxic Relationships and Emotional Abuse. Now, Whole Again is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores. If they don't have it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.